Okay, and the live stream has started. Welcome, everyone. I'm very excited for the program tonight. This is the first co-produced webinar of a new coalition that is dedicated to fighting back against the military-industrial complex all across the country. We are the War Industry Resistors Network. I see Christian is sharing you're sharing your screen here, but no
Sorry,
worries.
jumping the gun.
Jumping the gun a little bit, Christian. I like the enthusiasm though. But I just want to intro the new coalition. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Brian Garvey. I'm the assistant director up at Massachusetts Peace Action, just outside of Boston. And I'm also a member of the Raytheon Anti-War campaign, which is a campaign that is dedicated to fighting back against the military-industrial complex in our own backyard. And what we quickly found was there are groups just like ours all across the country. We first hooked up with a group down in Asheville, North Carolina, Reject Raytheon, that is fighting against the new construction of a facility down there that's endangering the environment, and also, taking tax dollars and putting them towards the war industry. But then we found that there are groups in Huntsville, down in Alabama. There are groups in California, really across the country. There's now over a dozen groups that have come together to oppose the military-industrial complex and really the negative effect that they're having on our country and on people all across the world. And so, over the last 20 years, these companies have made an absolute fortune off of war and militarism, while the human needs here at home have simply gone by the wayside. So we decided that we could band together and amplify each other's work and really strengthen each other and build towards something larger, that we could make the sum of the parts greater than each individual. So one thing that we've decided to do and undertaking is we're going to have a coordinated week of action around tax day. It's a very important day because that is it's a good chance to let everybody know where your tax dollars are going. And unfortunately, we continue to spend year after year more of the discretionary budget on war and militarism than anything else. And that affects everything. I like to say that it's the reason why we can't have nice things in this country, like decent education, good infrastructure, a serious fight against climate change, and so many other things that our people need. So to talk about the week of action, I want to pass the mic over to Olivia from Code Pink. Olivia, can you unmute yourself and tell people a little bit about how they can get involved in the week of action?
Sure. Thank you, Brian. I'm really looking forward to this webinar and the series that are to come. I'm Olivia with Code Pink and the Cut the Pentagon for the People, Planet, Peace in the Future organizer based in DC. And we are looking to combine virtual efforts like these webinars with in the streets direct action. This week, between what is going on in Yemen and continues to go on in Palestine and the recent escalations with Russia, any day is a good day to go after the war machine, but especially tax day. So this is where you all come in. After the Congress or this administration passed the most bloated budget ever, we want to send a message that we, the people, do not agree with that. There are so many things, some of the things that Brian said, that we're looking to fight for, not just fight against. And we want to bring in the climate justice movement, racial justice, indigenous rights, workers and economic justice, because we want to shed light on what we can fund instead and what we should be. So we have a document that people can sign on to get a little bit more information. We're going to have a hype call in February for people to get involved, to plan an action in your city or to tag on to one. And so this gives a little bit of information on it. Example targets could be weapons manufacturers and arms dealers. We're going to talk about the big five tonight: Lockheed, Raytheon, Boeing, and others. Other examples could be financial institutions invested in these companies, intelligence companies, your congressperson or senator's office, or other ones. Those are just starting ideas. So you can sign on that form. I think Brian's going to join it, or I'll drop it in the chat there. If you have any questions, feel free to put it on that form and we'll reach out to you. We're building this as it comes. So we're open to more ideas, and we'll have more webinars between now and tax day, which is the week of April 17th to 24th, to continue to plan. So thank you, and really looking forward to this webinar.
Yeah, and Olivia is exactly right. This is not going to be a one-off. We're going to do a whole series of webinars that look at the military-industrial complex and the effect that they have on labor, on our environment, how they get involved in our culture, really inextricably, and that this is all going to be building to a week of action where demonstrations are going to be happening across the country. So if you would like to get involved and plan one, or join one, or get your organization that's fighting your local war company to join the coalition, please fill out that form in the chat, and we will reach out to you. And we want to hear your ideas, like Olivia said, and make our coalition stronger. But we also have some great experts who are going to help educate us a bit about really what the military-industrial complex is, and their reach and their control over our politics. So, without further ado, we're going to meet the big five. So to tell us about, who these companies are and where they're located, we have really a great independent journalist, Christian Sorensen, who is focused on the U.S. war industry. He's an Air Force veteran and the author of Understanding the War Industry. He's also a senior fellow at the Eisenhower Media Network, which is an organization of independent veteran military and national security experts against the war. His website is warindustrymuster.com. And if you go there, and we'll link to it and also send a follow-up, you can view his monthly work. He really goes through a lot of the Pentagon contracts and does a lot of the very important work that allows activists to do the work that we do. So Christian, take it away.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Cole. Thank you to everyone at Mass Peace Action. Thank you to Professor Crawford and Mr. Hartung as well. Can you see my screen, everyone? Give me a thumbs up, yeah?
Yes,
okay.
We can.
Excellent. So, war industry. The war industry is one side of the infamous military-industrial congressional complex. The other two sides, obviously, the military, which is headquartered in the Pentagon, and Congress, which funds the entire racket. So the war industry is comprised of the corporations that develop, market, and sell goods and services to the U.S. military, to U.S. intelligence agencies, of which there are 17, and allied governments around the world. The notable war corporations, there are hundreds of all sizes, but the big ones you already know. You know Lockheed Martin, you know Boeing, you know Raytheon, you know Northrop Grumman, and you know General Dynamics. These, by far, the big five, hog most of the portion of the budget that goes to corporation. So well over half of the Pentagon's budget goes to corporations, and those big five hog most of that. But we also need to know L3 Harris, which is, depending on how you count, the sixth largest war corporation. Huntington Ingalls, which is a major shipbuilder. We need to know Honeywell, Bose Allen Hamilton, Leidos, SAIC, CACI, KBR, Textron, and many more. Leidos, CACI, SAIC, Bose Allen Hamilton, they not only contract with the U.S. military establishment, but they're heavy into intelligence contracting. L3Harris as well, all of them, in fact, aside from Huntington Ingalls. But we need to know these names. These should be household names. They should be as household names as McDonald's or Chevrolet. Banks and asset management firms. Financial firms hold most stock in any given large war corporation. In that way, they are at the top of the war industry. They vote the shares that control nearly all war corporations. The two main private war corporations right now are Sierra Nevada Corporation, based in Sparks, Nevada, and General Atomics, which is based in Poway, California, down near San Diego. And General Atomics, as you know, makes the MQ-9 Reaper drone. So whenever there's a drone strike carried out by the US government, it uses General Atomics drones. So who are these primary institutional stockholders? The main ones pop up again and again: BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard. Those are the big ones. And obviously JP Morgan Chase, Morgan Stanley. So when we get into later on possible divestment strategies, we can think about how to target the banks to get at the real core of this. And it's also important to note, and the other speakers will talk about this, I'm sure, the infamous revolving door wherein capitalist elites rotate into the Pentagon and out of the Pentagon into the war industry. They also rotate into the financial industry. So General Petraeus, for example, is on Wall Street. He's at KKR, which is a large financial firm. General Odierno, another four-star general who was popular in Washington, D.C. circles for his role in the Iraq War. He went to JP Morgan Chase. Dave Goldfein, who recently retired from the Air Force, four-star general, he went to Wall Street. He went to Blackstone, I believe. So this is something to keep in mind. Private equity is another part of the financial firms that sit at the top of the war industry. Private equity is when a relatively small number of wealthy people invest in a corporation. They take it over. They keep it in private hands. It's not on the stock market. They buy the corporation, they run it themselves, and that usually involves restructuring it, including cutting jobs, cutting wages, and then they sell it for a profit. Private equity is in the war industry big time. Vertex Aerospace, based in Meridian, Mississippi, I believe, does a lot of maintenance, a lot of aircraft work. It's owned by American Industrial Partners, large private equity firm. And there are many other examples of this. Lindsay Goldberg owns Amentum. Amentum runs a lot of bases at home and overseas, repairs aircraft. Amentum recently purchased DynCorp, which is a famous mercenary group. So private equity is there all over the place. The war industry, these corporations, these war corporations, they're everywhere. They're in all 50 states. However, they're concentrated in a few areas: Greater Boston, Northern Virginia, through up to Baltimore. And they're there mostly for headquarters, but there are a lot of facilities there as well, trying to get all the contracting money going from the military bases that are in the area and the intelligence work as well. Florida, Tampa is a huge spot for war corporations lately because there's Central Command down there at MacDill Air Force Base, as well as Special Operations Command headquarters is down there. Huntsville, Alabama, the quote unquote Pentagon of the South. The only difference there is Huntsville, Alabama has enormous war corporation presence because they actually build stuff there. They make stuff. Whereas there are war corporations in the halls of the Pentagon, but they're not building anything there. So Huntsville, in many ways, is more powerful in terms of a corporate perspective than the Pentagon. Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas, all over the place there, and California, Silicon Valley, San Diego, and Los Angeles. How do war corporations present themselves? So Corporations are masters of public relations. They say they're job creators. They provide solutions. That's very popular in corporate literature and in any earnings calls, anytime they talk with Wall Street investors, anytime they have a brochure or put out any paperwork, it's always providing solutions, supporting critical programs of national significance. They refer to our troops, giving our troops the tools they need. These are very effective. To you and me, they might seem laughable in a way, but it's very effective public relations, particularly when they're schmoozing with DC elites, with both parties. Corporate authority. The permanent warfare state's expansion is part of the overall growth in corporate authority that happened after World War II. Particularly, the defining moment is the National Security Act of 1947, which established CIA. It established the Air Force as an independent branch from the Army, and it basically entrenched the permanent warfare state that we have now. But this corporate momentum built over time. Another defining moment is the Lewis Powell Memo of 1971. Lewis Powell went on to be a Supreme Court justice, but he got to start as basically the capitalist. He was a big business guy. And in his memo, two other businessmen, business leaders, he outlined tactics to increase corporate authority, including capture of media, of government, of the judiciary. And the Supreme Court has helped this along. It has steadily increased corporate authority. These are a list of notable rulings: Buckley v. Vallejo, First National Bank of Boston versus Bellotti. What these did over time, Citizens United, most famous among us, I imagine. What they did over time is if you give the corporation more and more authority over time, it then takes more and more authority, and it's now very difficult to bring that back, to get that back into the public realm. Ways the war industry influences federal policy. We'll talk more about this, but the big ones are lobbying, campaign finance. If you're running for public office, I fund your campaign. When you get into public office, you then owe me. It's a way of directly controlling you. It's legalized bribery. It's legalized corruption. The revolving door, in which capitalist elites rotate into the U.S. military establishment, and rotate back out into industry, and then often rotate right back in, gaining more knowledge every time they're on the inside. So when they get on the outside, when they return to industry, they then leverage that knowledge for greater profit. The war industry funds media, it funds think tanks in order to keep the narrative not necessarily pro-war, although that's part of it, but it's mostly to make sure that threats are inflated and to make sure that there's broad military deployment across the world, because these bases and this military infrastructure worldwide is incredibly profitable to corporate America. The war industry plays the jobs card with politicians. They're not required to come through with as many jobs as they promise, and there's always fine ink, fine print that in these contracts that say, oh yeah, we should come through with this, but if we don't, we might come through with this. And so the jobs card is very effective. And then corporations, increasingly, one of the trends in the contracting announcements that I study, corporations have increasingly and very clearly taken over policy processes within the U.S. military establishment. So a few examples of that: SAIC running strategic plans and policy support for the Air Force Deputy Chief of Staff in the branch known as A-10. It doesn't matter. Basically, it's a corporation that contracts across the breadth of the U.S. military establishment, functionally running policy within a slice of the Air Force. Deloitte is a famous consultancy firm, and it is also involved in strategic assessment and planning within a different deputy chief, the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations. And CACI develops and manages policies and practices for acquisition within part of the Navy. So what we have over time is a military establishment that is corporate in its function, in its actual self. And the corporations have taken over so many military functions that it is now such a bloated beast that not only is nobody in charge, but to the extent that anybody is in charge, it is the need for greater and greater corporate profit, and it's self-justifying. The costs, which Professor Crawford can get into, and Mr. Hartung as well, they're enormous. Discretionary funding going toward profiteering and destruction instead of human need, a permanent warfare state, which justifies itself, injury and death and trauma to civilians overseas and to returning US troops, militarization of our society, on the verge of nuclear war. All these nuclear weapons, they're on hair trigger, particularly the land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles. The Bulletin of Atomic Scientists has said that it's, most recently they said 100 seconds to midnight, which is basically we're very close to catastrophe. And pollution, carbon emissions, particulates, nuclear waste, burn pits, PFAS. PFAS are forever chemicals. And yeah, Superfund sites, toxins in soil. It's a nightmare. And it's important to note in these contract announcements that I study, who cleans up the pollution? Corporations. So the Pentagon and the war industry pollute, and then the war industry gets a lot of money to clean up a fraction of that pollution. So it's you couldn't write this stuff. It's a tragedy. We can talk about ways forward as we get further on. This is my last slide. It's just some ideas. Local divestment campaigns, which we've talked about, could be at the city level, the state level, university endowments as well. The high bar, something we can shoot for, is a constitutional amendment banning war profiteering. Nationalizing large war corporations would be an amazing step. It'd be incredibly difficult, but it's something that we should at least shoot for. Workers taking control of the war corporations and forcibly converting them to civilian products, and restorative justice for corporate criminals. We are not going to get out of this unless we address the criminal nature of the entire enterprise. So with that, I will stop the share and I will go on mute, and I'm happy to field questions towards the end. And yes, thanks again to MAPPA and to Professor Crawford and Mr. Hartung as well.
Yeah, thanks, Christian. And just to remind everyone that that Massachusetts Peace Action is just one organization in this new network, the War Industry Resistors Network. Over a dozen groups now across the country, kindred spirits, fighting the military-industrial complex in our own backyard. It's truly about thinking globally and acting locally. But one thing that I want to do, and I'll put it in the chat and send it to everyone in a follow-up, is to go to warindustrymuster.com, find out how you can support Christian's work. He is an invaluable resource. Don't shake your head. Forewarned is forearmed, so to speak. So you do a lot of that work that allows us to do ours. So I thank you for that, Christian.
You're very kind. Thank you.
Yeah. Well deserved. And I just want to remind everyone, please do fill out the form. I can see about 26 of you have already, but that's only 10% of our audience. We need people not just to learn, but to get involved. Because the only way that we're going to change this is to take action. So please do fill out that form. I'll put the link in the chat again, but I want to pass it on to our next speaker, who I'm sure many of you know because he's incredibly prolific, but William Hartung. He's a senior research fellow at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, which is a great think tank for peace. His work focuses on the arms industry and the U.S. military budget. He was previously the director of the Arms and Security Program at the Center for International Policy and the co-director of the Center's Sustainable Defense Task Force. He's the author of Profits of War, Lockheed Martin, and the Making of the military industrial complex, and the co-editor with Miriam Pemberton, who we hope to have very soon on a different webinar of lessons from Iraq, avoiding the next war. So thank you so much for being with us, William Hartung. Let me put you up on the screen and take it away.
Okay. Well, thanks, Christian. That was awesome. And I learned a lot, which is a good thing. I'll probably steal some of your lines, but I promise to, ascribe them. Thanks to Masterpiece Action and all the organizations that are pulling this together, the hundreds of folks who are attending. I'll be really glad to hear from Nita Crawford afterwards. So the pressure's on, with panelists like Christian and Nita. I'm kind of like, wow, I really better get my act together. So anyway, as was mentioned, the contractors are cashing in. And when Eisenhower gave his speech about unwarranted influence by the military-industrial complex, which was 60 years ago this month, he talked about the pervasive influence, and he said it affected every city, every state house, every office of the federal government, and even the very structure of our society. So basically, he was saying it's not just that you're getting ripped off, but these corporations and their allies are a threat to our democracy. And I think that's pretty clear if you look around today. Eisenhower did that partly because the Air Force and the companies were trying to push him to build a nuclear bomber that he didn't think was needed. They also tried to build thousands and thousands of intercontinental ballistic missiles, land-based nuclear missiles, beyond what Eisenhower wanted. Now, Eisenhower wasn't actually the peacenik. I mean, he helped overthrow the governments in Guatemala and Iran. His nuclear doctrine was massive retaliation, ending life as we know it. But he was also a fiscal conservative, and he didn't like the fact that the admirals and generals and corporations were trying to push him around. So this led to a speech. The military budget, the Pentagon's budget, is about $300 billion more now than it was when Eisenhower gave his speech. So it's just grown and grown over the years. Lockheed Martin, according to the government data, got $75 billion in Pentagon contracts in fiscal year 2020, which is 1.5 times the budgets of the State Department and the Agency for International Development combined. So that kind of just captures the militarization of our foreign policy, when one company can get more than what we spend on diplomacy by a huge margin. So the 2000s have been particularly good years for the weapons corporations. I did a report with Brown Costs of War, and we found that since 2001, the Pentagon spent $14 trillion, half of which went to corporations, and $2 trillion of it went just to the top 5, to Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman, Boeing, General Dynamics, Raytheon Technologies. And during that same period, those 5 spent about $1 billion on lobbying, but it kind of worked out. They got about $18,000 in contracts for every dollar they spent on lobbying. So it's a good investment for them. I mean, they would have got some of the contracts anyway, but clearly, given the money in stake, they're well willing to throw a lot of money at lobbying the government. So these are the companies that make the bombs, the tanks, the combat aircraft, the ships, the nuclear weapon systems that are used to fight or threaten to fight U.S. wars. And if you count that along with the costs of stationing troops all over the world, those weapon systems are, building them, researching them, maintaining them, is the primary driver of high Pentagon budgets. And as a result of this, the U.S. spends more than the next 11 countries in the world combined on its military, many of which are U.S. allies. It spends 3 times what China spends, despite all the threat inflation we're hearing about China these days, 10 times what Russia spends. So these corporations are part and parcel of why that's all happening. And Christian had a good slide that showed all the different tools of influence that they have. I'm going to talk a little bit about each of them. It includes lobbying, of course, campaign contributions, what I call job blackmail, the funding of think tanks, and the influence of government bodies that help define U.S. military priorities. So on the campaign spending front, these companies spend tens of millions of dollars in any given year. And the top 5 alone spent $60 million on lobbying in 2020. I mentioned that translated into huge windfall contracts for them. And they blanket Capitol Hill. In an average year, the industry as a whole has 700 lobbyists working for it, which is about 1 for every member of Congress and then some. And as was mentioned, most of these lobbyists come from the revolving door from the Pentagon and Congress into industry. And when they get there, they use their specialized knowledge and their access to their former colleagues to do the bidding of their companies, to get them better deals, better contracts, more taxpayer money. The Government Accountability Office recently did a report, and they found 1,700 examples of generals, admirals, acquisition officials that decide what the Pentagon's going to buy. 1,700 of them going from government to work for military corporations. And that's probably a low estimate because although they're supposed to report their employment when they leave the government, many of them don't. Just a couple high-profile cases. Former head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Joseph Dunford, went straight to the board of Lockheed Martin when he left the government. A woman named Heidi Grant, who runs the Pentagon's, did run the Pentagon's arms brokering agency, which in Orwellian terms is called the Defense Security Cooperation Agency, as opposed to, merchants of death bureaucracy. And she went to Boeing the exact day that she left the government and had been negotiating with them months before for that job. And the revolving door goes both ways. There's people who go into government from industry. And 4 of the last 5 secretaries of defense worked for either General Dynamics or Raytheon or Boeing. The current Secretary of Defense was on the board of Raytheon. Jim Mattis, every military writer's favorite Secretary of Defense, came off the board of General Dynamics and went back there when he left the government. So you've got the two-way street. You've got the folks using their contacts from government to help their corporations. You've also got people in government who are looking forward to working for these companies when they get out. So they give them a better deal. They don't push that hard on cost overruns. They don't do the kind of scrutiny they're supposed to do over these companies and how they spend tax dollars. Then there's the funding of think tanks, which was also mentioned. And my colleague, Ben Freeman, who is now at the Quincy Institute, but we also work together at the Center for International Policy, did a report on Pentagon and military funding of think tanks and found that $1 billion had gone from those 2 sources to think tanks just in Washington. And it includes a lot of the big ones that you would think of: the Heritage Foundation, Center for New American Security, Center for Strategic International Studies, Brookings, Council on Foreign Relations, as well as smaller think tanks like the Hudson Institute and the Lexington Institute, which lobby heavily for nuclear weapons spending. And these are across the board. Center for New American Security was started by Michelle Flournoy and Kurt Campbell, both prominent Democrats who have their own consulting firm, because they wanted the Democrats to have their own think tank on Pentagon and defense issues to show that they could be just as tough as the Republicans. So it goes across parties. It's really following the money that gives you a sense of where these folks stand. So a lot of the things that these think tanks argue for: higher Pentagon budgets, supporting wars overseas, building a new intercontinental ballistic missile, obviously profit these companies. But it would be a lot less persuasive if the head of Lockheed Martin stood up and said, "Hey, could you give me a few billion to build nukes?" as opposed to a seemingly objective think tank making basically the same case. So it's almost like a form of political money laundering. They kind of use these companies, these think tanks, as kind of their intellectual front groups. And then before I get to the jobs issue, which is probably their biggest lever that they use, these companies also insinuate themselves into government advisory bodies. So, for example, there was a thing called the National Defense Strategy Commission, which all the hawks on Nuclear Hill, on Capitol Hill, waive this report when they're calling for increased Pentagon spending, because they call for a 3 to 5% real increase every year for the Pentagon forevermore, which if they did that, we'd be spending $1 trillion on the Pentagon before the end of this decade, instead of only $750 billion. So that body, which called for that, Project and Government Oversight found that more than half the members had worked for arms companies, were on the boards, were consultants for arms companies, or were from think tanks that got major funding from arms companies, including CSIS. The second in charge at the Pentagon now, Kathleen Hicks, came from CSIS, which is afloat in contractor money. And the head of this commission was the former head of naval operations and a board member of Northrop Grumman. So, nice objective advice about how much to spend on the Pentagon. So the last issue is jobs. And to give just one example, the F-35, which Pogo has said may never be ready for combat, it's going to cost $1.7 trillion, the most expensive weapons program in the history of the Pentagon, which is saying a lot. And they claim, Lockheed Martin, the contractor, to have facilities in 46 states and to create 250,000 jobs. Now, if you look at the numbers carefully, it's probably about half of that, but it's still a lot of jobs, and they're placed in the districts, especially of members of the House Armed Services Committee, the Senate Armed Services Committee, the Defense Appropriations Committees. And so the people who make the decisions have jobs in their districts relating to those companies and those weapon systems. Now, of course, as a lot of you probably know, any other way of spending that money would create more jobs, probably 1.5 times as many for green energy or infrastructure, more like twice as many jobs in education, if you could shift that money, which we should. Heidi Peltier, who's at Brown Cost of War now, did a report for them on green manufacturing. She found that if you cut the Pentagon budget by about 15%, you put that money into green manufacturing, you'd get about 250,000 jobs, net increase in jobs, compared to spending it on the Pentagon. So the jobs argument is kind of the reason I call it job blackmails. They're basically saying to these members, if you vote against this weapon system, we're going to tell your constituents that you're voting against their jobs. So even though there's many better ways to create jobs, the power of the military industrial complex is standing in the way at the moment of doing that. So I'll wrap up, but what do we do about this? Of course, we have to build power. And I think the coming together of this group is an important example of that. But the Pentagon budget has gone down before, at the end of Vietnam, at the end of the Cold War, end of Korea, and often because of peace movements, as well as huge changes in the global political situation. And we should be at a moment like that now, with pandemics, with climate change, with racial and economic injustice. I think more and more people can be persuaded that we don't need aircraft carriers and nuclear weapons to protect us when you've got hundreds of thousands of people dying of COVID, more than have died in all US wars since World War I. So I think there's a moment to educate the public. And there's groups like the Poor People's Campaign, the Movement for Black Lives, who have raised the Pentagon budget issue. There's a group called People Over Pentagon, organized by Public Citizen, that has groups from the environmental movement, from the immigration reform movement, political groups like Invisible and Move On, political reform groups. So there's a basis out there, as well as grassroots groups all over the country. There's a basis to build the power we need to defeat these companies. And we just need to keep working at it. So I think I'll stop there. There's plenty to talk about, but I want to hear what Nita has to say, and most importantly, what everybody on the call has to say and wants to talk about.
And thanks so much to William Hartung for that great presentation. And you make a really important point. One of the best things that you can do is join an organization, build power. I think right now we're up to 60, 65 people who have signed up for interest in joining the War Industry Resistors Network. We need everybody to get involved to fight back against these forces. So please fill out the form if you haven't yet. I'm going to pop it right back into the chat. But next, we are going to turn it over, hold on one second, to Nita Crawford. For those of you who don't know Nita Crawford, she's a professor and chair of Boston University's Department of Political Science and a faculty research fellow at the Frederick S. Pardee Center for the Study of the Longer Range Future at BU. She's a co-director and co-founder of the Cost of War Project at the Wasson Institute for International and Public Affairs at Brown University. If you have not checked out the Cost of War Project, you need to. And don't worry, because we'll be including all the links to these great resources in a follow-up email. We're going to be losing Nita Crawford. She's going to be moving across the pond and going to Oxford this summer. But we, well, although we hate to see her go, we are going to get every little bit that we can out of her while she's still here in the Bay State. So Nita Crawford, the floor is yours.
Hi there. You know, this is a great opportunity for me to be on a panel with excellent information given by Christian Sorensen and Bill Hartung. And I'm not sure how much I will add. I do appreciate the work, though, of Mass Peace Action, which I've known for decades, and this entire coalition. So what I want to talk about today, if you can see my slides, I don't know if you can.
We do.
Okay, and you should just see one right now, right? I'm hoping.
I think you have to go into presentation mode, but we can see it very clearly,
Okay.
even if you can't manage.
Let's see. I'll try that again. What do you have there? Do you have just the main slide, or do you have the whole thing?
We are seeing all the slides to the left, but we can see the main slide very clearly.
How you doing now? Same thing?
It is the same.
Okay. All right. Let's go back here. So what I wanted, why am I bothering to try to make this bigger? It's because I have some data that I want to share. But while I figure that out, just let me say that the Cost of War project, of which I'm a co-director, has been trying for the last 10 years to provide information to people on and Bill Hartung has contributed to it, the cost of the post 9/11 wars, but the project is also aiming to, in the future, expand its analysis beyond the post 9/11 wars. And I've been working on military emissions, and that's one of the things that I'm moving across the pond to do, is to join a number of people in the UK who are very focused on military emissions. But just let me say a few basic things here about, if I can get this to, I'm obviously not going to get it to work. one more time.
Yeah, I think you had it there, actually.
What? Oh, you
Yep.
shouldn't have let me get
I'm,
out.
I'm sorry. I tried to catch you there.
Okay. All right. How are we? Have you got the whole thing now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, looks great.
Great. So look, one of the most important things that both Christian and Bill mentioned was the size of the military industrial complex. And what I'm looking at here are just the manufacturers. They have two elements to them: the end use, the people who build the F-35, that would be the end use of something, and the supply chain. And what you see here is that in the last few years, the total number of people working in military industry, the industrial part, not the contractors who do services, have increased. Now, if you just look at the end use part, that's about 7% of all US manufacturing. And when you add the supply chain to it, it's about 17% of all US manufacturing. It is significant, but it's not the whole game. So I just wanted to emphasize that and really keep in mind that sort of long tail of people who are involved in military manufacturing, which brings up the question of conversion, which we could talk more about. What I also wanted to highlight, and you've already seen these names today, but was some of the quantity of money that these U.S. corporations are earning, and also to contextualize it. Now, Lockheed Martin is the #1 U.S. company, but it's globally the largest arms manufacturer, and it has most of its industrial output is for arms sales, right? 89%. That's the most concentrated. Boeing is much less concentrated, and it's much more flexible than, and I think there's much more hope for conversion. So to convert Lockheed Martin to something else is a big ask and would require a lot of thought. Okay, so now I want to just switch to something else which I care deeply about, which is the emissions. The military emits greenhouse gases when they make machines. And here what we have are the emissions of Lockheed Martin from 2010 to 2020 in some years. And this is the information that I could get in the public realm. And they're also getting renewable energy credits in some years because they're trying to green themselves. So what you see here is that they're emitting directly Scope 1 emissions, a certain amount of energy, a certain amount of emissions, and then they're also purchasing energy from the grid, which leads to emissions, greenhouse gas emissions. Now, in the big picture, the US military emits around 51 million metric tons of greenhouse gas, CO2 equivalent, in any 1 year. Okay, and that's down from the past. So it's quite significant. That's about, it's larger than the emissions of, let's say, Sweden or the 4 Northeast states combined. So it's a huge amount of emissions. But when you add the emissions of military industry, what you see is that they're also a significant contributor of greenhouse gases. And here you have the top 12 companies and their emissions in 2019. And that gives you another 5.2 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent. Now that's larger than the emissions of very small countries, right? Small economies. But then remember, I had in that one slide, the direct manufacturers have, let's say, 800,000 people. But then there's this long tail, indirect jobs that are created, to supply Lockheed Martin or Northrop Grumman or Boeing. And what you see when you add up the emissions of the suppliers is that it's about another 50 million metric tons. So when you add them together, the military industrial emissions and the military's emissions, it's about 100 million or more than 100 million metric tons each year. So as the UN Framework Convention has said, every metric ton counts. And so one of the ways that I think we can think about this is realizing that the military industrial sector is actually greenhouse gas intensive, more greenhouse gas intensive than other sectors. So not only are there fewer jobs created in military industry, not only are the profit margins high, not only is there a revolving door, not only is it the case that the companies are producing weapons that are destructive and not productive in the economy, they're also significant greenhouse gas emitters. In fact, if you compare their emissions to other industries, they're more greenhouse gas intensive. So there's an additional incentive to convert these industries to something less emitting. And finally, I wanted to show you this slide and give you this general trend which we see. Now, and I'm trying to inoculate you against an argument that you will hear frequently, which is that, okay, the military itself is greening and they're reducing their emissions, and so are military industrial corporations. And this is true, right? So you look at their emissions, and for most years, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, in the last 10 years have reduced their greenhouse gas emissions. But why I'm showing this to you, so you know it, and realize, however, that this is still a lot of emissions. So finally, and I'm going to stop sharing here, I wanted to get to these larger sort of strategic points. First, the United States, in its high level of military spending and its pivot to Asia after the end of the war in Afghanistan, well, really prior to that, and in the confrontation with Russia, is engaged in not only this year and last year increasing the military budget, but as Bill and Christian suggested, plan to increase the military budget for the foreseeable future. And what this means is that our so-called adversaries, China and Russia, will likely increase their budgets. And what this then means is that as they arm, their military emissions will also increase. Now, we know that China's military industry is powered heavily by coal. So we can assume that when the US-China competition increases, as the US increasingly pivots to the Indo-Pacific, what we'll see is Chinese emissions will increase. So there is a natural coalition here between the anti-militarist work that we do and obviously the people who are working on climate change. And I think that this is a nice lever for us to think about using in the future. So I wanted to be short because so much else was covered, and to leave time for questions since we're near the end of our time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nita. Just a wealth of information there. And you're right, we do want to get to some Q&A from the audience, but our time is short. Maybe a few of us can go over. But first of all, I want to hand it back over to Olivia right now, if I can.
Yeah, thank you.
Take it away.
Thank you so much. And I think especially talking of the climate militarism intersection, the week of action we have is overlaps Earth Day. So if folks want to do solidarity actions with climate movement or climate organizations. I think this is a really good opportunity. We saw at COP a lot of, I know our Code Pink team was there, and with the other alliances did a lot around decarbonize, decolonize, demilitarize, war is not green, and no war, no warming, those elements. So please, there are so many ways that people can get involved in their actions through different issue topics, but especially the climate one, considering the date lineup. So Brian put that in the chat. I just want to let folks know too, we're going to have a specific organizing call around the actions on February 2nd at 6:30 p.m. We'll send that in the follow-up email for you to have for us to have specific questions and go into breakout rooms determined by cities on that day, in addition to the other webinars. But please, I think Brian said there's 68 signups so far. So that's really great. Let's see if we can get to 80 just in this call. And then that gives some other folks the opportunity to think about it for a little bit and sign up later. But I do want to have folks sign up for that. And in the email follow-up, we will put the links to this live stream, this recorded thing. So I know people were asking for the presentations and stuff, as well as the follow-up links. But please do sign on to that right now. And remember, that's a week of action around tax day to cut the Pentagon.
Thanks, Olivia. And yes, I think we're hovering around 70 signups right now. I think we can get to 100 by the end of this. Why not? And please share that link with your network of people who can't be here. We're going to send it out as a follow-up in a follow-up email, and just spread the word far and wide. The mainstream media is not covering this stuff. We need to spread the word ourselves, and like Bill Hartung was saying, we need to build power if we're going to take on these incredibly powerful interests who don't have our interests at heart. But I do want to turn the mic over to you for a couple of questions. Donald Smith, are you with us?
Yes, I am. This question is mostly for William Hartung, but anyone can answer. What amazes me is that Republicans, their main thing is they hate taxes, they hate government, and they say government is wasteful. But the Pentagon is the most wasteful, unaudited, destructive part of the government, and they support it. Although, I have to admit, the Koch brothers are funding the Quincy Institute. So I wanted, anyway, William and others to comment on, whether there's any chance. Actually, some of the Trump supporters, criticize, the military. Donald Trump has been inconsistent, of course, about that. I wanted you to comment about whether there are allies among, Rand Paul on the right, who can, turn against the military-industrial complex.
Thanks, Donald, and thanks for keeping that question short so we can get to as many as possible. Go ahead, Bill.
I think there are, although obviously it's difficult waters. I mean, I'm not going to work with somebody who instigated the riot at the Capitol or says that the election was phony. So that rules out a substantial number of people on the right. But there's others, there's libertarians. And also, I think, Trump, in a weird way, ran as if he was anti-war. He beat up on Hillary about the Iraq War. He criticized military companies. I think, although he was a complete hypocrite and turned 180 when he got in, some of his followers believe that stuff. And so I think there is a possibility of drawing some of the people at the grassroots level who, mistakenly, to put it mildly, have supported some of these clowns to actually come around and, support at least specific initiatives. So it's difficult, but I think it's possible. And I think it's worth the effort. Although I would say, personally, I would want to focus primarily on building progressive strength, because there's so many progressive movements going on now. There's so many people who are progressive or in communities that we should be reaching who aren't voting yet. So that's my personal view, but I understand that there are, ways to reach at least some people on the right. I just, it's a question of deciding kind of relative energy, where you want to put it.
Thanks. Next, I am going to turn the floor over to Renee. Let me put you up on screen.
I'm really glad actually the previous speaker raised that, because I think this whole thing of dividing the American population between left and right is absolutely absurd. And it's something that we've got to get away from. And there are other kinds of mythologies that those of us who really want to secure eliminating the danger of nuclear war, we're going to have to, in the course of working together, I think we're going to find out that there have been many mythologies that have kept us from working together. I happen to come from the Schiller Institute and from the Lyndon LaRouche organization, and we know a tremendous amount. I worked with them for 50. I worked with the LaRouche organization for 50 years. And I can tell you that the media and the think tanks and the financial community have been very active in creating all kinds of mythologies in order to divide us against each other. So it's good to hear the kind of discussion you're having. I just wanted to say in that light that while we're mobilizing people, I think what would be very important is to clarify for the American population, this would really weaken our opponents, clarify for the American population the offer that Russia has just made to the Biden administration and by extension to NATO for a new kind of security, for a clarification of the security arrangements in Europe in order to defuse the crisis around Ukraine, which, if it's not diffused, could actually lead to nuclear war, even by accident. There's general agreement that there is that danger. I think people should be aware of it. We should get this out to the American population massively, but also at the same time, I would be interested, Mr. Hartung in particular. I always like to talk to Christian, but that's okay. I'm in this situation. I'm also tossing the question to you, which is, I'd be interested in knowing what you think about the offer that the Russians made and are demanding that the answer be given in writing about sticking to the 1997 the line of division between Western Europe and Eastern Europe, and also this question of not allowing Ukraine to join NATO because they have security interests as well.
Thanks, Renee. That's a good question. I definitely want to get to as many questions as possible, but just to let our panelists know that we are in overtime. So if any of you need to leave us, you're welcome to, but obviously we will we'll continue to talk to us as long as you'll let us. So I'll throw that question open to the panel.
Well, we have a fellow, Anatol Levin, who's written about diplomacy relative to Ukraine. And what he's talked about is, first of all, Ukraine not joining NATO. Second of all, negotiations in Eastern Ukraine to demilitarize that and provide autonomy, to remove some of the friction between Russia and Ukraine. And I think a lot of the talk about sending troops to Europe, about putting, ships closer to Ukraine, about sending more weapons is, kind of pointless, other than the fact that it could escalate tensions, because there's no way in the world that NATO is going to actually go to war on purpose against Russia. But if you put advisors in there to train on weapons, some of them get killed, for example, you don't know where the escalation is going to go. So I think it's urgent that there be a diplomatic solution, which means a less rigid position on the part of NATO. I think Russia's not going to get everything it's asking for, probably shouldn't. But I think there should be some actual dialogue and some actual diplomacy instead of both sides digging their heels in, because there's too much at stake.
Christian, Nita, do you have any thoughts on that? I know that's on a lot of our minds this week.
No, I would just add that Aaron Matte over at the Gray Zone had an excellent interview that was posted today with a professor from, I believe, the University of Wales. I could be incorrect on that. His name was Richard Sakwa, I believe, Sakwa. in any event, it was a really good interview and provided a lot of context regarding NATO Moscow relations. So I would throw everyone to view that.
Thanks for the suggestion. I'll definitely share that link out in the follow-up email. Next up is Michael.
Let me say
Oh,
something.
no, yes, please do. Please do.
Really quickly, I think that Bill is right. Russia can't get everything it wants, shouldn't get everything that it wants. And to be consistent, the peace movement should oppose what Russia is up to, because it is aggression. They've aggressed against a neighbor in 2014. This is the threat of aggression. I think we have to say that this is wrong. But I also agree with Bill that if there's actual negotiations, it's better than the posturing that we've seen and the brinkmanship, and we're likely to see escalation. That's perhaps gets out of control if we keep down this path, and history gives us plenty of precedents for that. So I just hope that we're all on the same page that this is wrong. If the US were doing it, we'd say it was wrong.
Yep, I think that's very insightful. Thanks. Next up, just want to let people know we're up over 80, but I think we can hit 100. So sign up if you haven't yet. We need to build power, like Bill Hartung was saying. But next up is Mike Passourini. I'm going to unmute you. Go ahead, Mike.
Can you hear me?
Hear you just fine, Mike.
Okay, thanks. First, just a quick footnote. Christian mentioned the Powell memo, and I think it's just useful to note how extreme things have become, because even in the Powell memo, he explicitly supported collective bargaining and unions. And look at where we are now with the corporate propaganda movement, who are very explicitly anti-union, anti-collective bargaining, and so forth. So aside from that, my question for all the panelists is, I'm sure most of you are aware that at Walter Reed Hospital, for the past, I think, 2 years, they've been working on a universal coronavirus vaccine, something that should be effective if it works against essentially every kind of coronavirus, every strain of COVID-19. And I was wondering if you think that that's something that could be a very good opportunity to make our point to the public. It's in its phase 3 trials right now. We don't know if it's going to be successful or not, but if it is, it most likely will be a real game changer. Do you agree that this is a good opportunity to say to people, okay, here's a sector of the government that pretty much gets however much money it wants. Here's 2 things they've done in the last 5 years. One is a universal coronavirus vaccine that, again, it's contingent on if it works. So I'm kind of cart before the horse here, but if it does, it's going to save lives, keep people healthy, And then look at something else they've done recently. They created a new low yield nuclear warhead for submarine launched ballistic missiles. Which one of those is more valuable? So it's kind of in that mines over missiles sort of framework that I've seen used a lot here in the peace movement. So that's my question. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Any thoughts on that? Vaccine research versus research in new nuclear weapons.
Well, I think anytime we can talk about the human costs and human benefits of the money that is spent with our taxes, and you can drive it home, and when there's lives at stake, I think it's worth raising that. And also the idea that there's parts of the government that can actually do things that are helpful to the public. Because I think sometimes, we focus so much on the military sector, all the devastation that's caused because of them having this money, how it's used. We forget that there are people in government who are trying to do the right thing, and then given adequate resources, could make our lives a lot better.
Thanks, Bill. If there's no other comment, I want to get to Mary Ellen. We have a couple more questions. Thanks for staying overtime. I really appreciate it. Mary Ellen?
there.
Hi, Mary Ellen.
So really, thanks for such a great presentation, and all the speakers are wonderful. I have a comment / question to direct to Christian. You mentioned that there are certainly ideas and campaigns for divesting from weapons industries, and I just wanted to widen up the discussion a little bit. The other day, we might have to think about this a little more carefully, because the other day I was listening to an interview with Robert Powell, who was talking about divesting from fossil fuel industries. And he pointed out that there's a kind of an ironic side to it, that it seems immediately that it's such a good idea. But what happens is when those companies are divested from, who comes up and picks them up are, hedge funds and private equity firms. So you did mention the idea of, nationalizing such industries, and it may seem pie in the sky, but I think it's something that the peace movement should, and the left more widely, should really think about more long term, that ultimately that really should be a goal, of what we want to achieve, because in the more immediate term, it may not actually solve the big problem. So do you have any comments?
I think you raise a very good point. And I think the overall strategy would be to not focus exclusively on divestment, and to use legislative tools at the state and local level, as well as pushing for nationalization, as well as pushing the riding this wave and increasing the wave of class consciousness among the workers who work in many of these, who work within the war industry, in order to ultimately perhaps have them within their own respective corporations work toward conversion. And one of the things I notice when studying these contracts and sort of parsing them along what corporations do what, is to see that conversion is possible. I mean, there are some, like Professor Crawford pointed out, there are some like Lockheed Martin that are more rigidly war-oriented than others. But even in Lockheed Martin, the war corporations have many different business segments. And so while, for example, Lockheed Martin and General Dynamics and many of the big ones and many of the medium-sized ones work on ordnance, missiles, bombs, rockets, etc., they also have other business segments that are very readily convertible into peaceful purposes. So they work on transportation, they work on satellites, they work on logistics, warehousing, information technology, training, artificial intelligence. All these don't have to be, they're not intrinsically militant business segments. So that goes, that's on our side. And I think with increased worker consciousness and class consciousness, I think, there's still hope. And I would also like to just say that mathematicians, technicians, workers of all types, physicists, engineers, they might work within a war corporation, but there's nothing in those fields that say, all right, this is a militant field that must be put toward war-related activities. So we have that on our side. We have a lot of things on our side, and as long as there's a glimmer of hope, we can, we shouldn't quit, and we should be cognizant of the point that you raised, that we need to address private equity, we need to address the banks, the institutional holders of all these public war corporations, while at the same time pushing in many different directions in order to get progressive legislation passed and to ride this wave of worker consciousness. So,
thanks, Christian. That we just need a couple of more to hit 100, and I'll be happy. But let's get right to the next question. I know we're over time. Thanks again to the panelists for sticking it out. 2 more questions. Albie, I'm going to unmute you and put you up on the screen. Go for it.
Hi, panelists. I'm Albie. I use they, them pronouns. I'm a U.S. Navy veteran and a member of Common Defense, and I happen to be an international relations and public policy dual major. I am anti-war. So my question to the panelists, do you guys have any tips or suggestions on how someone in my position might be able to change the system from within?
Great question. Who wants to take that? Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I think that there's a big difference between militarism and the values that people go into the military to promote. People go to the military to do a service, right? They want to contribute. On the other hand, militarist ideas say that military force is always or almost always effective, efficient, and useful. So that or there's the implication that we're the most powerful country in the earth, and therefore our perspective is right. And so one thing that one can do as a veteran is, of course, join veterans organizations. But if you're active duty or in the reserve, then you could begin to question and make a differentiation between the values of service to country and to community and the unquestioned or unquestioning support of military force. And if I might take the opportunity to clarify something, look, I'm not saying that the U.S. Is right in what it's doing with NATO and Ukraine. What I am saying is that what Putin is doing is not right either. And that's my point. So there you go. So come back at me.
Yeah, I appreciate the nuance. George, I'm going to unmute you. I think I'll give you the final question. Thanks for hanging over time, panelists. We do appreciate it. George, I'm going to put you up on the screen for the final question.
Great, thanks. George Newell, Veterans for Peace. As a veteran, I tend to think in terms of strategy and tactics. And one of the strategies that I noticed that's been used successfully, literally for the last 2,000 years, since the times of the Romans, is divide and conquer. And I'd like to put that on everybody's radar and see what the panelists see as a solution to this. I see my Democrat friends wasting a lot of energy ranting and railing against the Republicans, and I see my Republican friends wasting a lot of energy ranting and railing against the Democrats. This is not the Republicans' fault. It's not the Democrats' fault. It's the war industry's fault. And as I see it, we've been pretty much successfully divided and conquered. So I would like to see, are any of the panelists got any idea on, how to get around this ancient, but so far still very effective strategy of divide and conquer?
That's a good question, George.
Yeah, it's tough in the climate we're in, but I do think one of the underlying points is that it's not the party system that has caused this problem. It goes deeper. And so the question is, are there ways to communicate that to folks so that people across the spectrum can come together to fight these powers in the military industrial complex because of what it does to our lives, our livelihoods, to people around the world. And, so I would say, yeah, I think more energy into broad public education might get us somewhere further. But it's, in the world we live in at the moment, it is definitely incredibly difficult.
I'll just add that one of the things that has distressed me the most about the post 9/11 wars is not only the scale of destruction and spending, but the fact that at the same time, our democracy has been diminished in the sense that our access to information, civil liberties, the treatment of individuals who disagree with the foreign policy of the United States has been harsh. Some people have been silenced. I believe that it's clear, from George Washington's time through Madison to through the 19th century and the 20th century, that when the United States is at war, democracy declines, and we need a strong democracy that is robust deliberation, citizen participation, strong media to balance the militarized views. So democracy is really the commitment to use your words, right? It's the commitment to deliberation. And force says it doesn't matter what you say. It is the antithesis of democracy. So that's why the two operate in the seesaw relationship. So to have less of this divide and conquer, we need more deliberative democracy. And that's why I think that the work of peace action is also not just about opposing war, but it's about citizen action. And that's what Bill was talking about, what Christian's been talking about. It is making democracy work. It's more robust. And that itself is an antidote to militarism.
I think that's a really good note to end on. And I just want to thank everyone, all the panelists. George, that was a great question, by the way. But Bill Hartung, Christian Sorensen, Nita Crawford for joining us, Olivia DiNucci from Code Pink for being my co-moderator for this. But I also want to thank so many of the other people that made this possible. This is not just something that's coming out of Massachusetts. This is a nationwide effort, this War Industry Resistors Network that we're building right now. And we invite you to be a part of it. Sign up. We almost got 100 signups. We're going to build on that. We're going to lean on each other and amplify each other. And we're going to get stronger and stronger every day. So I want to thank some of the people that I see on the call that are involved in the organizing. Cynthia, Jack and Felice. I see Paul. I see Mike from down in Alabama. Olivia, Colleen and Garrett. I see Phil Noyce, who is out there at the Raytheon in Andover, Massachusetts, demonstrating every week now for decades. This is the kind of commitment that it's going to take our country back from the military industrial complex that has taken over our country, right? The United States did not win the global war on terror, and the people of the Middle East certainly didn't win the war on terror. Who did? Companies like Raytheon and Lockheed Martin and Boeing and General Dynamics and Northrop Grumman. And we need to make a change. If the policies that the people of this country want are going to be reflected in what happens in Washington, we need to end the massive influence that these companies have. If you will, I'm going to pass it once more over to Olivia to talk about the week of action.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again so much. I learned so much from this, and I know so many folks on this call did as well. I just want to say this is one of many webinars. We'll be having some other ones, and different of the organizations within the War Industry Resistance Network will be hosting those. So I know CoPink and company will be, I think, in April, and there's going to be a great one next month, and potentially more after that, considering there's so many folks here on this call. So please look out for a follow-up email, as well as some of how you just learned of this initially. We'll be sending also a link for our next call, which will be on February 2nd at 6:30, where we'll talk specifically about the actions. And then there will be a February webinar, March webinar, and April. But please look out for that and reach out to any of us through the email that you got. I'm going to put my email in the chat if you need to talk to me directly. But yeah, this is the start of hopefully a whole many actions to come, but we're going to center around tax day in April. So please go ahead and sign up. How many are we at now, Brian?
Let me check. We're pushing up against 100 right now.
Great. Well,
Let's
thank you.
see.
Please tell your friends and
98. We're almost there.
and get other folks involved as well, because as we know, militarism affects all of us, and we have to be in this together. So thank you.
You're so right, Olivia. Whatever you do, get involved, right? Take action, make a change. Thanks to all of our panelists. Thank you, Olivia. And you'll be hearing from us shortly. This network is going to grow and grow and grow. And I really appreciate all of you for joining us tonight. So thank you very much, and peace.